I played mostly 1-2 no limit tonight at the Red Rock. I sat down at 2-5 for a brief second. That's the first hand. But the 1-2 games were juicy tonight. A lot of people had a lot of money on the table. I ended up playing a ton of hands. I got pocket aces twice in this session. I made some great folds. I'm trying to make as many great folds as I can going forward, especially on the river when you get raised. A lot of the times they have it, especially in low stakes poker. So I'm trying to get better. I think I played a lot better poker in this session. Let me know what you think. Check out the hands from today's session. I sat down in the 2-5 game, and one of the first hands, we have ace-10 of hearts. We're under the gun. I limp. It gets raised behind me to 15. We got a caller. The big blind also calls, and I'm going to call. We're going to the flop 4 ways. The flop comes out. It's 6-9-9 with 2 hearts. We flopped a nut flush draw on a paired board. The big blind checks. I check. Everybody else checks. We're headed to the turn. The turn comes out the 4 of spades. So the fact that everybody checked on the flop, I'm going to bet on the turn to try to get some value with my top flush draw. I make it 35 to go on the turn. The player behind me folds. The next player makes the call. The big blind folds. We're going to the river heads up. So now, if the flush comes, I'll obviously bet my hand. And if it doesn't come, I'm going to be put in a tough spot. I think my opponent probably has, he could have a 9, he could have a 6, he could have an overpair at this point. But luckily the river comes out the 5 of hearts and we make the nut flush. So now I just need to decide how much to bet. I'm first to act. I bet out for $100 on the river and my opponent goes into the tank for a long time, thinking whether to call, thinking whether to fold. Eventually, after like a minute, he throws 100 and chips into the pot. I flip over my hand, ace-10 of hearts. And because he thought for a long time and mucked his cards, you have to assume he had a 9 in this hand. We're on the big blind with the best hand in poker, pocket aces. It gets raised to $6. The guy behind that makes it 25 to go. We're in the big blind. It gets around to us. And I definitely have to throw in a bigger raise here. I decide to make it 112 to go. We're pretty deep. It's 1-2, but we both have about 400 in front of us to start the hand. The initial raiser of 6 folds, and the other guy thinks for a little bit and eventually throws 112 in chips in the middle, and we're headed to a flop heads up. I'm out of position, so if the flop comes pretty good, I'm probably going to have to go all in on the flop. The flop comes out king, jack, 8, 2 spades, 1 diamond. I think for a second, not to make it super obvious, and I throw all my chips in the middle. I go all in, and he folds pretty quickly, flipping over his cards. I didn't see exactly what he had, but he threw his cards into the muck, and we take down a nice size pot. We look down at ace-10 offsuit, but we're on the button. This is a straddle pot. It's 1-2-5. Everybody folds. It gets around to me, and I raise 15 to go with only a few players behind me. Small blind folds, the big blind calls, and the straddle also calls. We're going 3 ways to the flop. It comes ace-5-8. We flop top pair, but there's 2 diamonds on the board on the flop. It goes check, check. I bet 25 on the flop. Small blind folds. The straddle continues to the turn. The turn comes the 3 of spades. So now there's an open-ended straight draw out there if you have 6-7. There's also a flush draw out there. So with my top pair, I'm going to bet pretty big on the turn here to eliminate all the draws and try to get them to fold. So I bet 60 on the turn. He pretty quickly throws his cards into the muck with only 1 to come. And I take down another nice size pot. Now we have pocket jacks. We're in middle position. I decide to raise to $10. And a lot of people start coming along. The guy behind me calls. The next guy calls. Eventually, 5 people make their way into the hand, and we're going to the flop 5 ways. I probably should have raised more, given that I'm in early position, because I don't want 5 people coming along, but that's a mistake that I learned for next time. The flop comes out 6-5-3, rainbow. It goes check, check. Now it's on me. I decide to bet $30, bump it up a little. Only people who are serious will continue at this point. The guy behind me fold. The guy behind me calls. One other player comes along. We're going to the turn 3 ways now. The turn comes the 6 of diamonds. So now if anybody has a 6, they beat me. If somebody has a 4 trying to go for the straight or an overpair, I probably beat the overpair. But a 6 now beats me. The first player checks. I decide to slow down on the turn because somebody probably has a 6. The guy behind me also checks. Now we're headed to the river. The deuce of spades comes, which completes the straight if somebody has a 4. The first player checks. I also check because I don't beat much at this point. The last player checks and flips over pocket 10s. And the other player was slow playing. The small blind had a 6 the whole time and he never bet, but he's going to win the pot. Now we're in the big blind and we have 9-10 offsuit, a hand that I won't play if a raise happens, but it gets around to me and nobody raised, so I'm priced in to check. We're headed to a flop with 3 players. It comes out 10-9-6 with 2 spades. We flop top 2. I bet $10 on the flop. We get 1 player to come along. Everybody else folds. We're headed to the turn. The turn is the 7 of spades, which the flush now hits. And if my opponent has an 8, he now has a straight. I check on the turn because that's a really bad turn card for me. And my opponent bets $25. And for some reason, I felt like he had a flush or a straight here. And I decided to muck my top 2. My opponent, I asked him to show, and he does. And he flips over the king 8 with the straight. And he also had the second nut flush draw after the turn. What a fold by me. Crazy fold. We get pocket aces again in this session. It gets raised to 20 in front of me. 1 player calls, and I decide to 3-bet up to 85 to go. Everybody else folds. It gets back to the initial raiser who goes all in for about $200 total. I'm obviously going nowhere. The next player folds, and we're all in pre-flop. I have aces, $400 in the middle, and the dealer puts the run out. It's jack of spades, 3 of spades, 4 of hearts, 3 of clubs, 6 of diamonds. My opponent flips over the ace of diamonds, and I take down a nice size pot, $400 pre-flop. We flipped over the aces immediately to show it and not be rude, and we take down a nice size pot on the run good. It's a straddle pot, and we have pocket 8s. We call for 5. A lot of the other players call. It gets around to the person who straddled, and he raises to 25, and he says he didn't even look at his cards. The next player calls. I call. We're headed to a flop 5 ways for 25, 125 in the middle. The flop comes 8 king 4 with 2 clubs, and we flop middle set. The player who made it 25 to go goes all in on the flop for about 150. We have $500 in front of us, and I just shove it all in. Obviously, I'm not going anywhere flopping middle set. Everybody else folds. We're now heads up. The action's done. I'm all in. He's all in. The dealer does the run out. It's the 7 of spades, queen of diamonds. He says 2 pair. He has king, queen offsuit. He flopped top pair. We have middle set with 8s, and we take down a monster pot in 1-2 no limit. Everybody was straddling, so we did too. We got 5-6 offsuit in the straddle. A bunch of players start calling. It gets around to me. I'm last to act. I check with 5-6 off. We're going to a flop 4 ways. The flop comes 6-3 deuce rainbow. We flop top pair. The first player to act bets 10. The next player calls. And usually when players bet small and lead out like this, they don't have a made hand. They have a draw. And I have a top pair with a weak kicker, so I want to drive them out of the hand. So I decide to raise to $40 on the flop, which drives everybody out of the hand besides 1 player, and now we're in position. The turn comes out the king of diamonds, which doesn't change much, but my opponent bets $10, which is pretty weird in this spot. I don't know what he has at all. I call the 10 just to head to a river. We see the 5 of clubs. We make 2 pair now. Our opponent checks on the river. I bet 25 to try to get some value out of my hand. My opponent thinks for not too long before putting $100 in the middle, check raising me on the river. Could he really have a 4 here? Would he have called my raise on the flop and then bet 10 on the turn with a 4? I thought on this hand for a long time, and usually in low stakes at the Red Rock, people don't raise on the river unless they have the nuts. After table talking, going back and forth, my opponent flips over one of his cards and shows the 8 of clubs, which makes it even more obvious that he probably has a 4. Why would he bet on the river? Why would he check raise me on the river and show an 8 of clubs and not have at least a 4? He wouldn't do this with 8 king because he would have been out of the hand already. So given the fact he flips over the 8 of clubs, it makes my decision even more obvious. I take my 2 pair and I throw it into the muck, and he's nice enough to flip over his cards. He shows the 4 of spades. He rivered the straight on the same card that rivered me 2 pair, but we make an amazing fold. Sometimes you have to fold to win in poker. It's not all about the winning hands.